Joining us today is our third part in our Shipping Insights series. And today we're going to be discussing why a container's chain of custody matters. My name is Brian Shaner. I'm the Vice President of Marketing here at Dun Bradstreet's Public Sector. With me today is Alla Kromskaya. She's the SVP of Analytics, also here at Dun Bradstreet. And today what we really want to talk about is there's a lot of things that are happening in the world where you're seeing a lot of delays in shipping, whether it's COVID related, whether it's weather related, et cetera. There are these important factors that are impacting when we are placing orders and receiving those orders. And sometimes what we hear from a lot of our customers is that they don't really understand that something's going to be delayed until it's almost like, oh, I expected it last week and now tomorrow, and now you're calling me to say, oh, it's going to be delayed 2 weeks. And in some cases, maybe that's okay and we can kind of handle that disruption. But in a lot of cases, there's a lot of critical needs that are being missed because we aren't able to see deep into the supply chain and where things are coming from, how they're getting to me, et cetera. And we're really going to talk about that today with Alla. So, Alla, I'm really glad to have you here to help us through this. So, Alla, we talk about this concept of chain of custody for a container. What does that really mean, and how are people able to look at this information and really mitigate some of those supply chain disruptions I was just talking about?
Thank you, Brian. This is a great question. Today we're talking about shipping data. So from a shipment data perspective, container chain of custody means that we should have visibility in each step of the process. Logistics is a very complex process that includes numerous companies included in the process and also numerous steps. It's starting from booking the shipment, unloading the goods, bringing them to the ports, unloading the vessels, and so on. There is at least 50 different steps included from to ship goods from point A to point B. And each of the steps included required documentation and transparency. So the customer, one who ships the goods or on receiving ends, they could see how this operation is going. So to your point, if there is any disruptions, that they can plan the action list that they can put in place. And shipment data provides this visibility. They show us all transactions from estimated time to actual time associated with each step of the process.
That's really interesting. I know we've talked in our previous sessions where the benefit of the shipping information is that you can actually see it when it's booked versus when you're expecting to receive it and after the fact. So we talk about, like you said, we can see it the moment it's loaded to the end location. When we prepared for this conversation, I think one of the things you talked about that was really intriguing to me is to be able to use this information and watch, like the government, especially like in the U.S., we see that when there are impacts in China, we feel the impact here, and there's this really high dependence on what China is able to get out the door and come to us, and other countries are experiencing that same thing. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, about seeing those dependencies that maybe when you look at buying one off, you buy this one purchase and it goes through China, and this other purchase, it goes through China, but then you're not really looking at it in aggregate. And I think you took an aggregate view of that and started to see that there's some dependencies that really cause issues.
Yes, this is a great question, because what shipping data allow to see, this is probably the number one insight that you can get from shipping data. It's dependencies. Dependencies between countries, dependencies between industries, and dependencies between companies. So I think during COVID pandemic, we all have this painful lesson learned, that when you depend on specific company or even specific country, that it really could significantly hurt your business, because during COVID outbreak, or like right now, it could be related to any natural disasters events. So, and we do see that in the last year, in the last 12 months, companies actually trying to diversify their supply chain and decrease dependency on single countries. Of course, even as of now, like for example, in US, a majority of containers coming from China. But if we compare, for example, with last year, that we do see significant decrease, and we do see that other countries like Vietnam, India, Mexico, they pick up this portion. So we do see diversification within portfolio chain. So dependency is kind of one thing, but I think the major problem that everybody feel right now, it's significant delays in shipment. It's become a normal that your goods will come with significant delay. The delay increased almost 2 times in the last year versus even prior year. That also was not the best one. So this data allow to see, is it like common problem across everyone? Or there are specific companies that are doing better or worse versus a peer group. And this could be in both categories, in terms of suppliers and companies that actually ship the goods, or even more important, maybe in terms of logistics company. Like when you select your logistic partner, you can see in the last year, in the last 5 years, what was performance of this logistic company versus a peer group who responsible for the same routes to connect the same countries, and be able to select company with the best performance.
Oh, okay. So I know we had talked about, this concept of track and trace, that it's a set of data that, we have access to. And I think,
Right.
To kind of restate what you're saying, I think it's important to see, okay, I've bought a good from company A. I've got to monitor what they're doing as far as their production, and I can look at, what supplies they need to manufacture. If they're building refrigerators, well, did they get the parts from their other places? And I can look at their supply chain, but really also having visibility into, great, now they've shipped it. Let's say, it's coming from, like you said, Vietnam, as an example. Great, now it's here in the US at the port, but now who's actually getting it to my location or to my stores? And, if I'm a government agency, I'm buying PPP, it's the same thing, I guess, where it needs to get manufactured, but then how do I get it from a port to my hospitals, to my agencies, to my locations, and understanding the shipping companies. I think what you're saying is understanding what their viability is just as important as that manufacturer. Is that correct?
It's correct, because they also have a big impact on overall time of shipment as a result of it, the cost of the goods, right? The cost of shipment to the company. As we mentioned, the shipment itself, it's a very complex process. So we do have additional data that called track and trace that cover 67 different events. So practically each step of a way, it's what was estimated time for this event versus the actual time of event. So if delay happened at the beginning of the process, it's allow us to forecast what will be the end results, what delay will be at the end of the process when the goods reach the final destination. And this kind of forecast could be very useful for the company because, to your point, they can make some plan, right? What to do about it? Like, do they need to inform their customers about delay? Do they need to look for alternatives? And this data also allow to look for alternatives because each shipment has a code associated with products included in the shipment, a very detailed, very granular level description. So you can see practically the whole world supply chain and identify companies who produce similar products. And if you have issues with your current supplier, it's allow you to select alternative supplier.
So it's interesting, and I guess it says I'm looking to procure goods, on behalf of my state, county, city, et cetera. It's important for me to look at that and understand it because if I can see increasing delays, potentially I need to take alternative action, potentially find an alternative supplier. And I think one of the things that's really interesting about what you discussed was, if I'm able to look at the businesses within my location, whether it's my state, my county, my city, I can see, I think you and I talked about yesterday that we can see, are the number of shipments going up or are they going down? And now all of a sudden I start getting indications of potentially of this business may be in jeopardy or this business is thriving. And I could take, what if I need to take a corrective action or follow up further or whatnot. And same, there's the employee aspect of it is, if their shipments are dropping off, potentially there's layoffs. I assume we could take and extract and extrapolate some of that data into those insights, correct?
You're exactly right. Shipment data, it's one of these real-time signals that we all looking for, definitely all data scientists looking for, right? Because it gives you information of what actually happens in the real time. And when you look at historical trends of volume of import or export, we found that it has very high correlation to its actually company overall revenue. That if you see a drop in volume of import, then you can also see a drop in the company revenue in most cases, right? So there is very high correlation. So it could be proxy in any processes that we use to predict your revenue.
Okay,
So,
yeah,
right?
that's real interesting. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Right, so this is one component. And another component, of course, that we discuss, it's about delays, right? So also if you see significant increase in delays, it's clear that it's going to impact cost of the goods. And some companies will be able to handle it, right? It depends on what products the end company produce, how price sensitive it is. But for some companies, it really can cause very significant financial problems. And we do see on specific companies examples when they experience increase in delays that their financial information also suffer. So on our part, we plan to start include this information in our risk scores that predict company viability and overall financial health, because we do see value in this real-time signals that shipping data provides.
Yeah, okay, and then as part of that, you're talking about the risk scores of the companies and all. And I think what we talked about in the past was we're connecting that because the shipping information gives us some company information, but then we take that, link that with the DUNS number, and actually get more insights to those companies. Is that accurate?
Right. This is the value that Dun Bradstreet brings, right? There is probably many companies that can provide shipment data. But what happened here is that we can take shipment data and we assign DUNS number. And now you can merge all these real-time signals from shipment with depth and breadth of DNB data, including financial information, firmographic information about company, and of course also compliance information. If you talk to any procurement department, it's always one of the top issues that they mention. It's the know your customers' due diligence for supply chain. It's the number one concern that they have when they have to onboard new vendor. And this shipping data give you visibility in supply chain. Then when we assign DUNS number, you can look at each company included in supply chain and say, is this business owner or the company itself, are they involved in any prior criminal activities or known fraudulent activities or any other malfeasance, or on any restricted lists like OSHA, OFAC, any other list with penalties. So now you can see this view that extremely helpful from compliance perspective. And of course, also to understand financial health of the company.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I think, as we were talking yesterday, I thought it was kind of interesting that we talked about, in some respects, you start to, as the government agency, COVID hit, and we talked about the pharmaceutical products and them looking at, it's not just about getting the vaccines to the masses, but it's also, when can I do that and using this data? And we talked about the ingredients.
Right.
I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Right. So as we discussed, this data give visibility in logistics company, in retail company on the receiving end, and manufacturing company, but also they give visibility in the product itself. You can see what happened to product, not only to the companies. So it's very possible to run analysis on product level and see which products are delayed globally, because they have very strong dependency on single country, on single company. Like we saw, it's very clear when we analyze shoe companies like Nike and Adidas. So they have very strong dependency on few plants in Vietnam. And when the COVID outbreak hit recently, these plants were closed, and you can see that all the shipments were significantly delayed, and it was no alternative. So you can have this whole kind of chain from one point to another and see all these dependencies. And again, not only about company itself, but also about product. And this could be done for pharmaceutical product or any other strategic product that goes through maritime shipment, to understand, like, is there any shortage, expected shortage in any strategic product? Like we do see, for example, right now, that there is definitely significant delay in any products like furniture-related product, consumer-oriented product, that it might cause disruption in holiday shopping for US consumers, because it is has significant delays, and it is a big concern if it will be able to come in final destination port at the time to be available for Thanksgiving holidays. And I think major retailers already understood it, like Walmart. Walmart was one of the companies who experienced significant increase in delay in the last year. And now they try to create their own cargo ships and manage them, to try to create kind of alternative system to beat these delays, because they do understand that this is one of the major topics that negatively impact the company.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I know we talked about that yesterday as well, and the holiday shopping thing is interesting because every year it seems to be like there's this one or two gifts that are super hot and you can never find them. This year, based on the conversations I've had in the previous 3 sessions, this topic keeps coming up.
Right.
And that sounds like a consumer story, but it actually impacts the states as well, because if they're not going to have the goods in the shelves, maybe they don't need as many holiday. You and I were talking about, maybe they don't hire as many holiday workers. They won't have the sales they had in previous years. That means potentially a lower tax revenue and so on. And having those insights are really important for those state, local, federal governments to see that and be able to kind of plan for that ahead of time and understand what is going to be their impacts there. I think that's great. And so now we're kind of digging into this, concept of other predictive insights that we can get in addition to like the hiring and the tax revenue. One of the things I think that was really, caused you and I to really get into a really deep discussion was this concept of, are companies willing to expose themselves to more risk due to COVID because the lack of insights into the new suppliers? Because I have my supply chain and I can look at that, but now if I'm going to add new people, because the people that have been serving them for years potentially are at risk, are going out of business, and now they've got to augment that with these new suppliers. And if they don't have that, so how do they combat that? What can they use this information for?
Right, you're exactly right. This is the pattern that we see, and this is the analysis that we're working on right now, to compare makeup of suppliers that were used by companies before COVID versus now, because all these disruptions associated with supply chain. We do see many newcomers, and we also see that many companies, local companies, also feel opportunity. Because global shipment, yes, it always was very cost efficient. But now with all these disruptions associated with global trade and global shipment, I think local companies receive additional opportunities to position themselves. Even if its cost is high, maybe to produce goods internally in the country. But when you take into consideration all this cost associated with shipments, with all this additional delays, that it's all adapts. So I think we, from like any economist perspective, from government agency perspective, they definitely should look at this, because it changes the whole the whole ecosystem, right? That's happening right now. That we do expect to see much more work going to local companies, and so it might change the economy that we live in today.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And I know we talked about different companies also having price sensitivities, because with these delays, the shipping companies are going to come in and there's a high startup cost, so they're going to be higher prices, the delays and everything, and that may ripple down. So I think that was a really interesting concept that we talked about, that those costs actually may hinder your economic base because they now have to pay more, and if they're using more of a just-in-time revenue system, that starts to impact them.
Right.
I think
right. It's just like I want to mention, it's really very difficult to imagine that if this delay increased so much, right, how it will not impact the cost. And if it impacts so much cost of shipment, and in the end, cost of goods, then it's also difficult to imagine that it will not impact overall inflation. So I think this is analysis that definitely it's time to run them. It's for economist teams, for government teams, and for any analyst team, because we do see significant macro changes that happened in the last year.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. Yeah, I think one of the things we're talking about shipping data, and in the previous two conversations, we spent a lot of the time talking about maritime for the most part. And I think the key here is in this conversation, we're not talking just maritime. We're talking the maritime, the trucks, the trains, and the planes. And so, looking at all of that kind of gives us that view. And I wanted to make that distinction. And as we think about those different modes of transportation, trucking was the one that you told me you had just or finishing up an analysis on the trucking companies across the United States. Tell us a little bit about that.
Right. Our primary focus was on maritime shipment because, again, it's a major venue, right? Maritime shipment responsible for at least 90% of volume of global trade. So, of course, it's number one priority when you look in logistic operations. But tracking delivery is also extremely important, given also all these disruptions that currently happen to tracking companies. At least in the US, there is very clear shortage of drivers. And as a result of it in US and UK, we hear like for example, from McDonald's, that they don't have enough the drivers for tracking companies, and they experience disruption in tracking. So we look at 1,000 tracking companies in the US, and we created the dashboard that allow any company who select tracking vendor have very good transparency about all metrics associated with tracking companies regarding their safety, performance, also in terms of delays, do they deliver things on time, the coverage, what routes they cover, the cost, what is the cost per mile of route, and also all additional compliance information. Like, for example, we included even information about the ESG rating. Are they good in terms of environmental, social governance? What is their financial performance? And to have this information on all 1,000 tracking companies in a very convenient way for any company that in the process selecting the tracking partner, I think this information will be very valuable.
Yeah, and I was talking, I actually met with Amber, who's our, another data analytics vice president here, and one of the things she said, I think she'd said something to the effect of if the companies are doing better, they tend to be a more safe and reliable and more compliant company.
It's like chicken and egg question. We don't know what caused what, but what we do see that company who have a great ESG rankings, right, that they're good in terms of social, governance, and environmental, they definitely have better bottom line. Right? They have much better financial performance. We did this analysis, and we see it's very clear that this company show much better growth in revenue, overall growth, and across all financial metrics. So we're trying to understand what caused what. Is it because they're better in financial situations? They have opportunity to be better in terms of social governance, or companies that actually run better and have better social practices and governance practices, they show better financial characteristics. So this is, I think, will require additional analysis.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So for the attendees that are here, put your questions in the chat and everything and ask that. I think as we look at things, it's been this interesting conversation that I've had over the last few weeks where we're talking about these. I think as I look at this track and trace piece, it's the first time I feel like we're getting down to this more micro level. Right. And being able to really see from end to end, from door to door, how it's getting to me and those impacts. Are there any things that you might suggest that people pay attention to, or any kind of findings that you found that were maybe surprising to you that you'd like to share?
I think the goal for everyone kind of to start see these delays as early as possible. In the track and trace data allow to do it, right? So you can see it at the beginning of the process versus the end. You don't have the surprises. Also, you can identify on what steps of the process your major delay happens. And you have this information for at least 5 years. So if there are specific patterns, right now, of course, on macro level, there are two major reasons for delay. One is shortage of containers, right? Everybody aware of this because all this increase in demand, there is very big shortage of containers. And the second one, it's bottleneck in the ports. And especially when any disruptions happened, like for example, last month, there was a port, Ningbo port in China, it was closed because of what was COVID outbreak for a few workers. So they closed the main terminal. So right away, it has impact on US ports. Like for example, we do see significant aggregation of ships in California ports and Los Angeles, and Long Beach, because this is a major port that receive goods from China in the US. So it's all interconnected, and it's important to understand reason. So it follows as the whole chain to start what's causing it. Okay, so the COVID outbreak in China in specific city, and what are the impacted parties? What industries impacted? What companies impacted? What cities would be impacted? And what ports are impacted?
Yeah, I know. I saw the article on Yahoo. I guess it was yesterday. There's, I think, now 56 ships waiting to be processed. I mean,
Right.
we did this 2 weeks ago. I think it was only 34, and it's just getting worse. And I think it's, all the things you talked about, from the delays of the, don't have enough people and all. And it was interesting. I kind of did the math from the conversation a couple of weeks ago, and basically, in order for us to get rid of every container on those ships, we would need a train 80 miles long for each container, to put a container on every one. I'm like that just blew my mind that it's that much of an issue and all. So,
and now you can take next step. It's very interesting information that you said, but now you can look with the shipping data. You can look at these 56 ships. You can see what products are on these 56 ships. You can see what is the destination port. So what companies actually will not get this goods on time. So you can continue to build this chain. This is the power of this data. So you can take any news that you see, like one that you mentioned, you build the whole story about it and understand the full impact.
Okay, yeah. So Patricia just asked a question about, I said 56 ships waiting. Yeah. So Patricia, what I was seeing and what we looked at was the average, or what normal is, 1 to 2 ships waiting. I think what they call it, tendered or anchored, I guess they said, to have it. So that's what's going on, and that's the delay. And I think, what we talked about last time, and I think, would welcome your thoughts on this, is it was really exacerbated by the Ningbo thing you mentioned, that, and all of a sudden those ships came, but also it's the holiday time. This is about the season when I don't know what the hot toy is going to be this year or whatever, but I can tell you, I'm waiting on a dishwasher and a microwave, and I've been waiting for 3 months, and I'm sure there's somewhere. But that's and all of a sudden all those things are coming together, and we just can't process it. And it's probably because they don't have the people, they don't have the COVID, they don't have the trucks there waiting to take the containers away, right? I mean, isn't that what we'd be able to see?
You're absolutely right. I think anybody who expect any delivery, global delivery, right? It's furniture, is it refrigerators, any kind of this large consumers goods, everybody aware that there are significant delays, and it will only be worse, at least until the middle of next year. This is what the forecast is.
Yeah, you're breaking my heart with that.
Right.
Hand washing for me, I guess. So, hey, so we're at the bottom of the hour. Thanks so much for joining us today. Everybody who attended, thanks a lot. Appreciate you being here and everything. Join us. We're going to have our next session on Tuesday, September 21st. We're going to talk about 3 learnings based on container life cycles. So, Ala, thanks again. And thanks everybody else for joining us.
Thank you, Brian. Have a great day.
Bye.